Hi folks, this is Glenn Guy from the Travel Photography Guru. I thought you might enjoy taking a little trip with me as I relive a part of a great journey I undertook in November 2010 to the Southern Ocean and Antarctica. With my friend and colleague David Burren, we co-ran a photography tour with Aurora Expeditions on their ship the Polar Pioneer. And our first port of call was Port-Stanley in the Falkland Islands. As you can see, a very picturesque location, and after having a couple of days at sea, I was pretty keen to stretch my legs and explore the location. It looked like a lot of fun. First thing I noticed was there weren't too many people around. We had cleared immigration, which was kind of surprising for me because I didn't expect there would be. But this is a English colony, and we had to get through immigration. But it was a very straightforward process. Only took a couple of minutes. Very friendly people. But beyond them, there was very little activity that was evident in town. Most of the locals were not to be seen. So I followed my way along the road next to the waterline, next to the bay, and very much enjoyed myself taking some pictures. Now the light was fairly bleak. It was quite an overcast day, and as I say, there wasn't a whole lot that was happening. So the trick was, how could I use my camera to make interesting photographs? And without wonderful light or interesting people, I concentrated on what most people call composition, but what I like to refer to as design, composition just being one component of image design. So in this case, the interesting building across the road wasn't so interesting when I was looking at it front on, so I simply moved around to the side and photographed it from an angle. I balanced the building in the background with the shrub in the foreground, the colourful shrub. And I used the road as a diagonal line running through the frame. And that diagonal line is basically an horizon. It's splitting the bottom of the image, which is the flower, bushes and grass, with the top portion of the image, the house and sky. So quite straightforward, but just, doing what I could to add a little bit more depth to the photograph, and a definite foreground, midground and background, the road being the midground in this case, and the diagonal line really does help in that case. Just a little bit further along the road, I saw the governor's residence. Now, I wasn't able to walk down the long driveway and actually have a look at the residence, but from outside, simply looking over the fence, it was quite a nice view of this picturesque location, and simply a matter of using the flowers to give a sense of space and depth again through a definite foreground, midground, background. Fortunately, the lawn area in the middle really gave a midground. So flowers, grass, and really the green of the rooftop ties in the foreground and background. And other than that, you're really relying on the textual qualities of the photograph. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple, nothing spectacular, but that's what was considered as I made the picture. So my initial response was based on what I saw of Port Stanley and what I knew about Port Stanley. So it certainly seemed to be a picturesque and quaint location, and that was witnessed from the deck of the Polar Pioneer as we came towards the settlement. I could also see, and that backed up what I knew about Port Stanley in the Falkland Islands, in that they're pretty much situated in the middle of nowhere, so there are not too many surprises there. I knew a little about the recent history of the Falklands, particularly the Falklands War, as it's known. And for those who remember, that was between England and Argentina, and it was during the reign, I guess we could say, or stewardship of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who, together with the Parliament at the time, took a great disliking to the fact that Argentina had invaded the Falkland Islands. I mean, they'd had a claim on it for a long time, and the English simply didn't recognise that claim. So the Argentinians took it, and the war was basically fought in response to that action. And you know, the English troops eventually retook the islands, but not without considerable casualties, most of which occurred at sea with the sinking of, in particular, one large English battleship. So really just across the road from the governor's residence, the main harbour there was this old rusting hulk of a ship, and it was interesting subject matter. The difficulty I had with it was that I couldn't get up high enough to make the photograph. If I'd been able to get up higher, we would have had water in the foreground, the ship, water behind it, and then the hills and sky in the background. So it would have been quite a three-dimensional photograph. I talk about three-dimensionality a lot because if you think about what a photograph is, you've got width and height. There is no actual depth in a photographic image. There's depth as we perceive it, three-dimensional space in the natural world, but not in a photograph. So there are all sorts of tricks we can use to suggest that depth, and shooting from a higher angle of view in this case would really have made a difference. As it was, the shape and textual qualities of the boat and water, texture in the water was interesting, and so that's really why I rendered the image in black and white. There wasn't too much inherent colour of interest in that scene. Looking again from the other side of the road, the horses, I think it's a cute image, but it's kind of funny to me too because you know, I'm thinking of England constantly when I'm there. I've never been to England. I'm hoping to go in the middle of this year, but you know, I'm aware of the tradition of the beefeaters standing on guard outside Buckingham Palace, and you know, I guess this is actually what went through my mind when I photographed these horses. A pretty significant crop of the image to turn it into panoramic, and I very rarely crop any of my images. I mean, extremely rarely, probably far less than 1 in 1,000, but it just suited the this particular image. Back to the water, and this one it looks like a seat, but I suspect that it's a some sort of mooring apparatus for which small boats can, you know, be tied up so they don't float out to sea. And in this case, again, without much interesting colour or light in the image, I'm really looking for other design elements, and the shape and reflection, which emphasise the shape of the structure, is actually really the subject matter of the photograph, rather than the subject matter being the thing itself. So I'm suggesting that the subject matter is the design elements that I'm actually composing the image around. And the dominant design element in this case is the shape. So after about 10 minutes wandering and photographing, what was my response? Well, it's really now about how I felt about what I saw. So initially it's what I saw when I arrived in Port Stanley and how I felt and what I knew about Port Stanley. And now my response had, I guess, gone up a level. I'm now really responding to how I felt about what I saw. And this is when photography starts to move towards art, because it becomes a more personal representation of what you see. So, you know, my response was that I considered the place to be beautiful but a little bleak. And, you know, I associate emotions such as melancholy with that. And a lot of people are a bit scared by the term melancholy, but I actually think it's a very beautiful emotion. You know, it's sort of that place between bliss and despair, I suppose. But, you know, you can't know bliss unless you've known the alternative. And melancholy's quite a lovely place to be in the middle of those, where I think, you know, there is still beauty in sadness, if you like. And it's not unlike having a walk on an autumn's day, you know. There's you may be cold, the world may not look very joyful, but there's a lot of beauty around in autumn foliage, for instance. I also decided while I was shooting, after about the initial 10 minutes, that the black and white rendering of the original colour files was really appropriate. Largely at this stage, I was thinking, because of the sort of nostalgia I felt was associated with these English settlements, because really they look as I imagined small villages in England would have looked maybe back in the 60s. You know, it's not a modern place, Port Stanley, and maybe that's where its charm is. So after initially walking along the harbour, I decided to go up the hill a little bit towards the back of Port Stanley, and from what I could see, Port Stanley's only about 4 blocks deep. It's quite long, where the houses are following the waterline, but then if you go up 3 or 4 blocks, you pretty much get to the back of town, and it was very interesting wandering around those back streets. So in this case, this image is very much about design elements, shape of the buildings, lines of the fence lines, lines in the patterns on the roofs, and texture in the foreground fence posts, and also in the grass in the fore and midground. And, you know, I was remembering while I was taking these shots that way back when I was a university student, I did a second-year folio where I was studying photography that was really based on design and based on the notion of making interesting photographs from otherwise banal subject matter. And, you know, that's been a trend in art for a long time, in photography in particular, probably since the 60s. And I go back to that approach often. Now I'm up for the picturesque and the traditional beauty of landscape and the like as much as the next person, but I'm also very interested in the notion of making something from nothing, and, you know, the transforming and transcendental nature of light to transform the banal into something much more beautiful. Just along the road a little bit further, so again, black and white rendering, and the reason for that is that although there was some colour in the scene, the colour was actually getting in the way, from my point of view, of the other really strong design elements in the picture, and they were predominantly texture, line, and again shape. So, you know, it is if you like, the back of someone's home, their garden. That's the story that the photo tells. But from a design point of view, I think that taking the colour out of the image actually made it easier to tell that story.